So I have recently been seeing a much bigger amount of people in the War Tycoon community saying that the vehicle game passes are actually not worth it and that they need to have a buff. Well, in this video guys, I'll actually be taking a look, do these provide enough value for how much you actually pay for them, or are people just bad and that's why they're complaining that the game passes are not good enough? Anyway, let's just jump right into it. So the first game pass we are actually going to be talking about is going to be the Abrams X tank. And by the way, I will also be talking about the spin vehicles in here, because they are technically going to be game passes because it's something that you spend money for. So anyway, taking a look at the Abrams X, what does it actually provide? A cannon, javelin, drone launchers, machine gun, and an autocannon. With this, it also provides a very heavy amount of health, and it is by far the second fastest tank in War Tycoon. So let's take a look on why people do not believe that this game pass provides value and why it isn't actually good enough. The main reason why is because the KF-51 Panther has received exactly the same drones as the Abrams X. However, they have recently been buffed and the drones on the Abrams X are just a lot more responsive and a lot better in terms of their speed, so they're definitely better than the Panthers. Now, taking a look at the cannon, the Abrams X really does have the best cannon in the game behind the Mouse and the E100, so I don't really see a problem with it. Next up, we also have ourselves the machine gun, which to be honest is one of the best in the game. However, it is slightly worse than something like the likes of the Bradley or maybe vehicles like the T-72 Moderna, so the machine gun could have a little bit of a buff perhaps to actually make it a little bit better. And then lastly, the javelin. Totally, I do not believe that the javelin is worth it at all, because it genuinely feels like it's the one feature that makes the Abrams X unique in some way, but in reality it takes like 3 to 4 seconds to actually lock on, and due to the bumpy terrain it's really hard to lock on targets and actually fire this javelin, so in some cases it is practically useless. So overall, the Abrams X is actually a very versatile game pass, and it is definitely worth the amount of money. However, to make it even better and more worth it, I think it could have with a little bit of a buff to the Abrams X Javelin, which we currently have, and then after in this, I think the tank would overall become perfect. Anyway, let's move into the next one, which is the BMPT Terminator, which we can actually see on the spin wheel. On average, people would have to spend around 2,000 to 3,000 Robux, if not more, to actually get the BMPT Terminator. Well, is this vehicle actually worth it? So what it does actually have to provide is going to be an explosive gun, which to be honest is way worse than the stuff like the Bradley. The normal machine gun is just an average machine gun, doesn't have a lot more information to it. However, this vehicle is incredibly fast and agile, and it does provide 4 missiles, which are by far one of the strongest missiles in the game, and they do have insanely good travel speed as well if we're going to be launching them at different targets. Now, the bigger question, are these actually enough to make this vehicle worth its very heavy price tag? Personally, I believe not, and the reason why is because the APS was added into War Tycoon, so it truly does make these missiles a lot less versatile. So overall, this vehicle is definitely really good in terms of air combat, but other than this, it really doesn't get the job done. So personally, I do believe that the BMPT Terminator definitely does deserve a buff, and I think it could do with a little bit of APS counts, and with this, perhaps they should buff the explosive cannon. Anyway, let's just jump into the next vehicle. Now, the next one, and probably the most expensive game pass in War Tycoon, the USS Zoom World, and its main contender is going to be the USS Independence. So I have recently actually tested the difference between the Zoom World and the Independence, and to be totally real with you, the Zoom World only beats the Independence in terms of beating it in ship 1v1s. Other than this, the Independence is overall the more versatile vehicle. The Zoom World does have a lot of weak spots, and the only thing that really makes it unique over other vehicles is its high amount of health and its bonus drone. However, once again, when the Independence was added, this unique idea was kind of taken away. So truly, I do not believe that the USS Zoom World is really worth its money. I think it could do with a buff to its AI turrets, because these things literally tickle compared to the serum that the Independence has. And I think the missiles could perhaps also have a faster launch speed, because what we have for the Independence is much faster than what we have for the Zoom World. Anyway, overall, the Zoom World is a very cool game pass. However, it does not feel very unique compared to what the Independence has to offer. It's just simply the more versatile option, which is pretty sad considering that this vehicle costs exactly 2,500 Robux. Alrighty, and next category that we are in is going to be the ground vehicles, so let's take a look at these. First of all, I will not be talking about the Speedy Humvee. It's just a 50 Robux game pass, and it does exactly what it says. I think it's just good in its own way. However, the main ones here, which are the game passes, is first of all, let's start with the JOTV. So what this vehicle provides is going to be an explosive gun, which is mainly good against killing infantry, a machine gun, and along with this, it has 2 javelin launchers. However, due to the bumpy terrain and how fast this vehicle truly is, it's pretty much impossible to use these javelins unless you are standing still and literally camping. Another problem that this vehicle has is, once again, it doesn't have APS, unlike a lot more other vehicles on the ground, mainly the tanks, and the APS on the tanks truly make the javelins on this vehicle useless as well. So personally, I believe a good way to do it is just allow the javelins to lock on faster and buff the explosive gun. And by the way, guys, the explosive gun literally has worse DPS than what the freaking machine gun has, because as you guys can see, the machine gun overall does 16 damage and then the explosive gun does 15. Can you tell me how this makes any logical sense, considering that this is the explosive one, and on average in War Tycoon the explosive damage is always higher than what we have for the standard damage? Yeah, genuinely the JLTV is not a worth Game Pass at all, and spending 200 Robux on it pretty much feels like a waste, but it's more like a collector's vehicle as of this current moment. Anyway, the next vehicle we also have over here is going to be the Boxer CRV, costing exactly 400 Robux. So the Boxer offers us an explosive gun and a machine gun, a high amount of health and decent speed. However, what it doesn't provide is APS, which it does have in real life, and overall the damages that the Boxer actually does are really good, to be honest. I think the Boxer is overall a very good vehicle because of how strong these things actually hit. I believe that this is a very good anti-tank vehicle due to its health, speed and overall high damages. However, where this vehicle does actually fall off is the fact that it's not really unique in any way. This pretty much feels like the most dry vehicle in the whole entire game, because once again, only it has an explosive gun and it has a machine gun. Nothing really special for this vehicle, so personally I feel like it's good and I think it's worth its money. However, it's still very dry and it does deserve a rework. Now lastly, moving into our final ground vehicle, which is going to be a spinning vehicle. Once again, an average price of 2,000 to 3,000 Robux. Let's take a look on what weaponry this vehicle actually has, and once again, is it actually worth its money? So what this vehicle has is pretty much a minigun slash Gatling gun, I guess we can say, 8 rockets which have some pretty decent area damage, and then lastly air missiles. So on paper this vehicle is actually meant to be pretty versatile, and that is pretty much about it. However, in practical usages, the only thing that this Gatling gun is actually good for is going to be air targets. If you see any tank, you're pretty much done. The rockets are only good against infantry, and finally the air missiles pretty much tackle any opponent you guys are ever going to be facing. On paper this vehicle is good because yes, it's versatile, you can airdrop it, it's amphibious, it has smoke, so many things, you know, but in reality it just simply doesn't get the job done. So I feel like what the Lavad mainly needs is just overall statistical buffs in order to actually make this vehicle a lot more useful, because right now or ever so far this vehicle is not going to be worth its money with what it does provide to us as of this current moment. Now next up, taking a look at the Mi-28 Havoc. Okay, so this vehicle was actually added a while back in order to actually replace the Mi-24 Hind, and it used to be known as one of the worst game passes in the game, but the Mi-28 replaced it, and it is armed with 4 air-to-air missiles, and it's also armed with 8 ground missiles. So on paper this vehicle should be really good because it does have a very high range of missiles. However, where this vehicle does actually fall off is the fact that these missiles, all of them, pretty much just tickle, and the only really high benefit of this vehicle is that it does have a lot of strength in numbers, but in reality these things really do not hit like a truck, they pretty much just tickle the enemy. So personally I believe it could do with a little bit of a damage buff in order for its missiles to actually become useful, because really the only thing standing for it is going to be its 2000 stat lock-on range, which is insane for a helicopter by the way, but also its missiles. Anyway, the next helicopter which does beat the Mi-28 by a mile is going to be the Super Hind, which was recently on sale for 1,200 Robux. This vehicle is actually unique on the other side. So with its weaponry, it is a pretty standard helicopter because it does have an explosive gun, it does have rockets, and it does have missiles. However, what it does actually make this vehicle really unique and stand out is going to be its bombs, which have B2 level area damage, but along with this, the rockets that it also has, pretty much 8 of them will be able to defeat an Abrams X, which is actually pretty insane. If you guys really want to go for some very high risk levels of operations against tanks or anything like that, then this is going to be the vehicle for you. And along with this, you guys could also play at very far range due to this vehicle having very high lock-on range in terms of its missiles, but also just being overall good against everything. So the Super Hind is definitely worth its money. However, the Mi-28 Havoc, let's just say, not so much. Now lastly, moving on to the planes, and we have exactly 3 paid vehicles for the planes. One of them is a spin vehicle, the other one is on sale right now, and the last one is a Game Pass. So let's first take a look at the Su-25 Frogfoot. Is this vehicle truly worth its money? So what this vehicle is really good for, and its main strengths are that it is a good killer in terms of infantry, and it's okay against tanks. In terms of air-to-air combat, it is kind of mid and it doesn't really get the job done. It has 2 air missiles which do pretty good damage, but other than this vehicle doesn't really stand out, except for the fact that it does have 10 rockets. So is a vehicle that on average we are going to be paying 2,000 to 3,000 Robux actually worth it? Realistically, I don't recommend getting the Su-25 Frogfoot in any way. It is a cool and unique vehicle, however, it just simply doesn't get the job done. I feel like it deserves much higher area damage and just higher levels of versatility for how much money you actually have to spend on it. Anyway, next up, taking a look at the Seahawk, which is currently being sold for 1,300 Robux. This is a pretty expensive price for a vehicle once again. So, however, it is much cheaper than the Su-25 Frogfoot, so realistically, it should be worse. Well, unfortunately enough, this is not the case. So what the Seahawk is mainly really good for is pretty much just going to be everything. This vehicle is an everything counter. It has literally the best turning speed in the game, like the F-22. It has some of the most responsive AI missiles in the whole entire game. You don't really have to lock on with them. And after this vehicle also provides stealth and overall insane capabilities in terms of ground combat, due to its main cannon being also incredibly strong. However, the only side where this vehicle actually falls off is the fact that it doesn't have flares. Instead, it does have stealth. However, I prefer to be using flares because I personally believe that they're a lot more useful in general, and we could play a lot more skilled with them and could use a lot more strategies. However, overall, the Seahawk is definitely worth its money, and a lot of people actually want it to be nerfed because of how powerful it is. So in terms of its money worth, I definitely say that this vehicle is 100% worth it. Anyway, lastly, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the F-35 Lightning, which this vehicle has actually not been touched in a very long while. Let's take a look for what it actually provides, and it does cost exactly 2,000 Robux. So the F-35 Lightning is overall the most versatile vehicle in the whole entire game according to a lot of people in the community. It does have some of the strongest missiles in the game. It is pretty much ranked as the 2nd or 3rd best plane in terms of air-to-air combat, slightly behind the F-22 and the Seahawk, but overall it does provide some insane levels of versatility because it also does have the likes of the veto mode, which could also allow you guys to be out-turning your enemies in fights which are going to be air-to-air, but also if an enemy is just on the ground, you guys could just fire these bombs, which will easily be able to take care of really any ground targets such as infantry. However, if we're taking a look at tanks, you guys would have to take a little bit more of a passive approach by going a little higher in the air and actually unloading all of your missiles. Overall, is the F-35 actually worth its money? Yes, it is worth its money, and it does still provide a very heavy advantage over other players because it is by far the best multi-role vehicle in the whole entire game. However, the problem which I personally see with the F-35 is that it doesn't really provide anything unique because the veto mode has actually been added to quite a lot of vehicles already, and even the helicopters also have something similar like the hover mode. So in terms of standing out as being a very unique vehicle, I don't think the F-35 gets the job done, but in terms of just brute force versatility and statistics, it is definitely worth its money. Personally, I believe what the F-35 actually needs is going to be like a little bonus feature like the Super Hind has, which is the bombs that makes it unique, that the Zoom World has, which is the drone that makes it unique, and even the Abrams X with its javelins. What I think could make a great Game Pass and overall making people really want to buy it is going to be making this vehicle unique rather than making it super strong as well. However, the F-35 is super strong on its own, so it's definitely worth it. Anyway, for the time being, those are all the Game Passes I want to cover, which are mainly the vehicle Game Passes. If you guys want me to actually cover the weapons and everything else that we have in the game, is it actually worth it? Should you buy it? Do let me know in the comment section down below. I will be happy to make a video like this once again. Anyway, I believe this answers your question. Most of the vehicles are actually worth it in terms of the Game Passes. However, some of them would need with a little bit of a buff or an extra unique feature. Anyway, I'll see you guys next video. Have a great day, and thanks so much to my channel members.